I've called this no more business as usual, but I have a deep feeling that I'm wrong. I'm going to be wrong. But anyway, I'm going to mainly focus on microeconomy, but not entirely. I'm going to talk about reforming the way firms are run in Ireland. I'd love to see, personally, one big reform in Irish company law, and that is a shift from shareholder value to the stakeholder value. You remember Blair talked about this some years ago, then promptly forgot about it. I think this is extremely important, and in the crisis, this deep crisis we have, it really should be on the agenda. It's not being talked about any place in this country. In Britain, even the Financial Times had, I have to say, a fabulous series called The Future of Capitalism, and they discussed this as well. I think, as I suspect, it might be just too radical. Ireland is the worst performer in the world. It's performing worse than Iceland on a number of criteria. Our economic growth level, our collapse in national income this year will be higher than Iceland's. And our unemployment is 12.5%. Will reach 10 at the end of this year. It's the worst collapse in GDP in the whole wide world that I can see. A couple of countries doing particularly badly, Japan, Korea, countries like that, minus 6% were higher than that. Bertie Ahern launched his book yesterday. He says Lehman Brothers, they caused it. We are doing much worse than other countries because our policies have been disastrous for the last few years, and nobody saw them coming, including myself. I did see the property boom, but I didn't link it with the banks. It seems so obvious now. I actually thought the banks were being run properly here. I knew Anglo wasn't, but it was the Fianna Fáil Bank, but I thought the others were, and I'll come to that in a few minutes. The indications were there. This bust could have been avoided, and we actually, even with tax cutting, on the current account, this country, with low public spending and low taxes, and that's debatable, we had 58 billion in current account surpluses in the 10 years to last year, and now we're facing big deficits. And now we're giving big money to the banks, big fat checks to the banks while we cut basic services. This here, above the line here is, that's the 58 billion. And you can see if they get the short adjustment that they're really pushing for, they don't want to extend that at all. They want to really cause a lot of pain. But that was the current account, that's from the government's own, the Department of Finance's own thing. And I keep reminding that no establishment economist will tell you, in spite of all the cuts, we had surpluses of 58 billion, which started, you'll see, just when Fianna Fáil and the PDs came into government. The Rainbow put the place in good nick and handed over. You know, there's a lot of politics on that. If the Rainbow, if McCreevy hadn't got in, what would have happened? I think we must redress the imbalances. The rules for companies changed radically in the last many decades, and you just listen to the radio in the morning. What are the markets saying? And you have all these stockbroker types talking about what will the market accept, what will the bond markets, the bondholders won't accept this, as if they're some kind of entity, as alien in space. If you read science fiction, you can imagine what these things, the markets, look like. Of course, they're man-made, and we make the rules, and we let them make the rules. There's been a huge shift in national income worldwide from labour to capital, including in Ireland. A little bit of a shift backwards here in recent years. Company taxes reduced, taxes on income reduced hugely here, I have to say, and consumption tax is big. For every 100 quid you pay in income tax this year, you will pay 147 as well in consumption taxes. I asked the question, if banks are too big to fail, well then why? And this is the key question I'm really getting at. Why aren't we questioning the whole concept of limited liability for companies? If they are not responsible, then we shouldn't give them the protection of limited liability, which has been around since 1855. The crisis happened because interest rates were low, too low, because we're in Europe in the common currency. But that we should have watched the banks, and we didn't. Why didn't we? Because the regulator was fast asleep. Why was he fast asleep? Because he believed that markets are free and they work on their own. And the Department of Finance believed the same. There is an ideology pervasive throughout the Irish public sector, and believe you me, I deal with them, where they tell you things that actually I think, are they taking the piss on me? But they say things like, well, we have a low corporation tax, and we've this, and we're cutting regulation, and all this shite. You know, you just wonder, are these guys working in the public interest, or do they actually, well, they do believe this stuff. And that, it's the narrowness of the debate that's really quite chilling. And these guys are still running the country. The government pursued really strong policies, pro-growth policies. Happy to say that we in Congress called on the government to take the foot off the growth pedal and go for economic development, which they didn't. We were party poopers. We also attacked them very heavily on the subsidies to the property investors, which they're slowly dismantling. And they allowed they knew the financial regulator wasn't doing his job. So the government boosted the property boom, of course they're all tied in with Fianna Fáil, and they blew the gains. The system of governance, but the world is now different. The system of governance has failed. Markets, the bosses of the big companies made the rules. They wanted this enormous remuneration. If you think about it, the heads of companies were making more money, and RTE of course, just the money Pat Kenny got. No wonder he attacked me so savagely when I talked of inheritance tax one day. But just was thinking of that on my breakfast this morning. But $1 million a year, how long does it take? $1 million a year, wow. The regulators failed. There was lack of, imagine no regulator in the Eurozone. Thank you, Charlie McCreevy. You've done great work in Europe too. And private rating of credit agencies, I've said this a lot, it's crazy. There are hard lessons to be learned, and they're still not being learned. The government is now back in the market in a big way. And all our mainstream economists, read Irish Economy, very interesting stuff, very good academic economists, but all they talk about is the technicalities of NAMA. But NAMA is a huge intervention in the economy. They're not talking about that change in their own philosophy. Of course, it's a twisted type of Keynesianism. Anglo-Irish Bank should have been let fail. Of course, wasn't let fail because it's the Fianna Fáil Bank. It's quite simple. And as Stiglitz said yesterday, and it's interesting to see, we have to get radical comment from abroad, you know, like Stiglitz, who isn't really quite radical, but by God, in Irish context, we could do with him and Krogman here. Things are changing a little bit, though, positively. Governments are cooperating. I just want to draw your attention to this. There's about 80 elite bank directors, and they oversaw the collapse that's costing you and your children 54 million. They're still directors of our top companies. Have a look at them. One of them heads the Smurfit Business School, where, by the way, they teach business ethics. One of them was Derek Higgs, and he's the Higgs Report on corporate governance. He was on the board for non-executive directors. He wrote the rules, and he was on the board of AIB, presiding over the collapse. They're on the boards of private hospitals, they're into private medicine, state bodies, they're entrepreneurs who got state assets for nothing and made their millions, real entrepreneurship there. They're tax exiles, they own most of the media, print, radio, the whole lot. They're economists who lecture you and me daily on why we should take cuts. And they're the leading lawyers and accountancy firms. They're every place, and they are making the rules, and they are making that whole anti-public sector ethos that's out there. The largest company, AIB, I'll do this, it's 2 slides very quickly, you can read it. There's been an unethical culture, and when I said I didn't see the banks, we should have. I mean, the ICI bailout, Rusnak, Haughey and Fitzgerald, because they were big bosses, got their loans written off, overcharging customers. These guys were the biggest entrepreneurs, my ass. They were the biggest value subtractors in the history of this country. The company itself fell from about 13 billion to $500 million in market value. There's a screw up for you, and we doff our caps to these guys. I think we should have a new system of corporate governance, mainly because corporations have been allowed to be too central in our economy. We need to shift from shareholder value, and the concept was built by Jack Welch of GE, and he now calls it bunkum. And he said we must move away from it to include all stakeholders. We need new accounting rules. We need to regulate the big four accountancy firms. The solutions are at firm level, state and global, and I'll focus more on firm level. What is the Irish government doing? First, it's making sure that there is no reform. I'm shocked really at the lack of debate in our parliament on this whole area. There's no one interested in it. They are about to reduce the disclosure of financial information by Irish companies under an EU directive. And the minister told us, well, I'm not going to take it to the full extent. They said no to whistleblowers protection. They told us, you're just after protecting employees. They said unlimited liability, where companies don't have to disclose anything. That's growing. They're not interested in considering shareholder value, and they're not interested in shifting from the voluntary codes of governance which govern accounting and so on. They've said no, and this is a very interesting article for somebody like Clinton O'Toole. Directors' responsibilities, the O3 Companies Act, Section 45, directors have responsibilities for cash, fiduciary stuff. They don't have for environment, employee health and safety. But in the law, they have. But that section hasn't been passed into law. Why? Because the Company Law Review Group said you shouldn't, because they are dominated by vested interests. It's a very interesting case study of lobbying by the rich and powerful. So, in conclusion, at firm level, there is no radical new corporate governance laws. It isn't even being debated. At state level, they're being forced to regulate. But once this crisis is over, will they let the regulator go back to sleep again? I suspect they will. Globally, I'm actually more optimistic. G20, I know we're supposed to protest against it, many do, but they actually have improved the international rule-making, and they've realized if capital is global, so too should be the rules, and they're moving on that. So, it's the deepest crisis ever. It should be the opportunity. It's so big that it really should be an opportunity for a massive shift in the way we do everything, particularly around business. We need new corporate governance systems. We need, in my view, we need social solidarity if we're going to have a rapid recovery. Every indicator is that they are not going for social solidarity. The elites have already swayed people into believing in deflationary policies, in tax cutting, even welfare cutting. We would have been shocked at some of the stuff a year ago, and now people are taking it. They want to go back to business as usual as soon as this trouble is over. They have control of the mainstream media, and there isn't really an independent media out there. My belief is there's two big emotions out there, anger but fear, and I think the fear is overcoming the anger, and that's stopping effective action. But we are planning a day of action on the 6th of November, and I hope you'll all be out marching in 8 centres around the country. Thank you very much.